Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Southeast RAC meeting. We're meeting here in Green River at the John Wesley Powell Museum. I guess we'll start with introducing our RAC members. It looks like we have a quorum, I hope. We'll start with those that are here. Looks like Kirk is online. Lynn was on at one point. We have Eric Luke here. Chris Wood, our regional supervisor, is here. Myself, Kent Johnson. We have Dana Truman. We have Sunshine Brosey, and we have Brad Richmond here. Is Lynn online still? Okay. Well, hopefully we get Lynn back. First, we'll go through the RAC procedure real quick here for those that may not know. As we go through our action items, we'll have a period where we'll have presentation, we'll go through questions from the RAC, then questions from the audience, and then we will go through comments from the audience. If you have any comments, make sure you get there to the table and grab a comment card and fill that out and bring it up here to the desk. Individuals will have 3 minutes at the microphone. You'll come up and state your name, and you'll have 3 minutes on your comment. Those representing organizations will have 5 minutes at the microphone and state your name and who you're representing. And then after public comments, we will go through the online comments. Chris Wood will take care of that, and then we'll go to the RAC discussion and motions. And it looks like Charles is here. Welcome, man. Glad to see you.
Thanks.
Okay, to start with, our first item is the approval of the agenda and minutes from the previous meeting. Any discussion on that from the RAC?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Okay, we have a motion to approve from Sunshine. Any discussion on the motion?
I'll second the motion.
Seconded by Charles. We'll just go ahead and vote. Just all in favor? Kirk, what about you? Oh, he's raising his hand. That's unanimous. And now we have the Wildlife Board update, and that would be myself. Go through that. I'll just go through the stuff that would be more or less pertinent to us here. I'll start with there was an update from the Technology and Weapons Committee that's currently meeting. They're going through different things and looking at that. I'm sure all of you are aware of that. They're in the yeah, plus tax. They're going through existing and doing a lot of discussion on emerging technologies as well, things that are up and coming, stuff the military is working on, and things that the military works on inevitably find their way into the private sector and be used by civilians as well. The discussion goes, they say it's difficult and they're having a tough time defining ethics for the harvest of wildlife and big game. And I can see where that's the case. And there's a lot of discussion on when and how they're supposed to limit technology and what that might look like. There's talk in there potentially restricting electronics in archery and muzzleloader hunting and optics in rifle hunting. And some of the emerging technologies that are being discussed, kind of surprising for me and interesting too, AI in optics, like artificial intelligence technology, electronics inside of binoculars that can actually scan the side of the mountain. You can look at it and it'll learn the side of that mountain, and then if there's something out of place, something different that you may not see, a shadow that's different, a shape of a deer or an elk, it'll define that and pick it out and highlight it for you. That's stuff that the military is working on. That's probably going to find its way into our stuff at some point. Another thing that is coming up is GPS rangefinders that are capable of, tracking your location where you're at and then giving the exact GPS coordinates of whatever you're ranging. And another thing that's emerging is real-time satellite imaging. The military's had this for quite some time, but it's coming to civilian use at some point as well. And that's something that they're looking into and how to limit that and regulate how that's used. They did talk about the use of two-way radios with nothing really definitive on that, as they reported. Another emerging technology is heat-seeking stuff that the military is working on right now that may end up finding its way into our guns or bows or whatever we're using. And then one thing that I wrote down that I was glad to see that the technology committee is there's no appetite on the committee to restrict any kind of handheld traditional rangefinders. And to elaborate on that, personally, my personal viewpoint, and I don't have any data to back this up or anything, but I believe that the compact, affordable, accurate rangefinders have probably done more to avoid wounding loss of game animals than about any tool we've ever used. And then one other thing that they have been looking at is maybe they would do certain units that would have weapons restrictions on them. And they're looking at that as a possibility in the technology committee. Now, this is, something that we all need to be looking at. And if you have thoughts on that, reach out to the tech committee. If you have ideas, things that you might want to look at, talk to them and find out what they're doing and make your voice heard, reach out to them. I mean, the list of who's on the committee is on the division's website, I believe, correct, Chris? Okay.
Or they can contact me and I'll get it to them.
Okay, or you can contact Chris Wood and he can get you that list if you need it or want it. Okay, with land use rule amendments at the board meeting, there was one motion to add to the action log to look into guides and outfitters on all WMAs and possibility of charging non-hunters a fee to go on the WMAs. I think there was one thing that was pointed out by Chelsea Duke. She's the coordinator for the WMAs for the division out of Salt Lake. She pointed out something I'm glad she did in the meeting, that the WMAs are very diverse. They're a lot different. There's a whole lot of different landscapes and different uses and different wildlife and things that use these different properties. And some of them, I might agree with some restrictions, and some of them I wouldn't agree with restrictions on them. But if you have thoughts about that, opinions, the way you'd like things to go, certainly reach out to on the regional level to Chris Wood. He can put you in touch with everybody that's the managers over the different WMAs in our region, and reach out to the other regional supervisors and let them know your voice, because this is something the division's going to be looking into. It's on the action log. They've been instructed by the board to look into it and start going through these things and see what they can do. So reach out to make your voice heard. That motion did pass unanimously at the board, and then there was a motion to accept the remainder of the land use rule amendments, and that passed unanimously. And then with the fee increases, there was several different motions at the board. The first one was to raise the non-resident hunting license for the 18 to 64-year-old adults to $120 for the hunting license and $150 for the combination. That passed unanimously. There was a motion to reduce the spot and stock lion tag to $10, and also to instruct the division to put a pop-up on checkout to offer that to people, so there was more knowledge that it actually existed and they could get that, and that passed unanimously. There was also a motion to have the dedicated hunters be able to purchase the first 16 hours of their time at $25 an hour, and then an additional 16 hours at $40 an hour, and that also passed unanimously. And then the motion to approve the remainder of the division's proposal passed unanimously. And then I'll just go touch on the expo permit allocations, a couple of things that would be of interest to us here in the Southeast region. There was, on the expo permit allocation, they reduced that by 3 elk tags on the Book Cliffs. There would be 2 less rifle and 1 less archery tag at the expo for the Book Cliffs. And then there will be one additional desert sheep tag on the San Rafael North at the expo. And then drought permit recommendations also would be of concern for us here. There's concern over the winter range due to the drought on the Henry Mountains, and there's a drought increase of 23 bison tags, 9 hunter's choice, and 14 cow only on the Henry Mountains. And that will conclude our board meeting update. And now we'll go into our update from our region, and that's our supervisor, Chris Wood.
Good evening. Okay, is that better? Okay, good evening. Good to be here. Thanks for being here on this fall, feels like summer day. I know many people couldn't make it because they're out enjoying the outdoors and hunting, but we have a quorum, so thank you for your service and for your preparation for this meeting. Just a quick regional update. We do have representation from each of the sections here tonight, both online and here in person. So if there's any questions with aquatics, wildlife, outreach, habitat, law enforcement, we have people here to help answer questions and talk to you afterwards too. So let's go through each section and give you an update what's happening in our region. Our habitat section's been busy planning our fields at our WMAs. We have a few WMAs where we actively farm. We use our water rights and plant crops for wildlife the Gordon Creek Wildlife Management Area is one of those, so is Nash Wash. We've been doing some work at the Matheson Wetland. We've mowed some areas to have better access to the ponds. That'll be helpful too for the upcoming waterfowl season. And also for some other projects we have going on that property. We had a field tour in the Book Cliffs a few weeks ago to look at habitat restoration projects and potential opportunities there. And then we've started a mud creek project, restoration project near Schofield. Our outreach section's been busy. We had a reptiles and amphibian night in Moab a few weeks ago. It was a lot of fun. We had a rattlesnake to show the audience. That was kind of fun. We have another event coming up on September 9th. It's Bat Night. It's an opportunity for people to see our biologists capture bats in mist nets and see the biologists handle bats and identify bats. If you're interested in attending that event, I think it's booked up online on our website that we have. But if you're interested, let me know. We'll get you in. So I've been to that event many times. It's a great night for all ages, really, to learn more about bats. We've also been doing some outreach for high schools in Capitol Reef, and then put on your radar, we'll have a youth pheasant hunt the last week of October in Emery County. Officers have been busy this time of year. They're working long hours and weekends, and they're investigating different cases that come up and checking hunters out in the field and responding to all kinds of calls. And then our aquatic section, we have some things coming up. Each year we gill net, or twice a year we gill net several reservoirs in our region. Gill netting is a technique we use to survey reservoirs. We put down nets the night before or the day before. Then the next day we come back and pull those nets, and we have an indication from those nets of what kind of fish are in the reservoir, what's the species abundance and diversity. We weigh and measure each fish. And so it's a really good opportunity for us to see whether that management plan or those management strategies in those reservoirs are working. And so it's also a great hands-on experience with wildlife. So if you want to get your hands fishy and help us pull fish out of nets, let me know. I'll get you some more details. But on October 7th, we'll be at Schofield. And then on October 12th, we'll be at Joe's Valley Reservoir. This summer, there's been razorback suckers in our Matheson Wetland Preserve. They've been entrenched into this pond that we had built there a few years ago. It's a nursery for them. We're now going to flush that pond out, and those razorback suckers will be released into the Colorado River. And it's just a really cool restoration project we've started a few years ago, and that project's working, and we'll see the fruits of that labor as we release those razorback suckers into the river. The Moab crew, we have a Moab fisheries crew, as you probably know. They are creating a captive broodstock of humpback chubs, collecting them in Desolation Canyon. So that's an exciting project. And then our native aquatic biologist, Tyler Arnold, is also creating a broodstock of roundtail chubs. If you know the old Moab City Pond, that's a pond that we cleaned up a year or two ago. There was a lot of goldfish in there, so we cleaned out the entire pond, and that'll be a broodstock for us in the future. So that's an exciting project. And that's all my update. I can answer any questions, or you can ask the biologist here in the room. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Chris. We're on to item number 5, our fishing recommendations. And as everyone went through that online. Okay, do we have any discussion, questions from the RAC about that?
I had one question, just kind of if you could explain to me what the difference, some of the water bodies, there's a bonus limit. Just curious, what's the difference between a bonus limit and just changing the limit?
Craig, did you get that question?
Yeah, Mr. Chair. Craig Walker, Assistant Chief of Fisheries with the Division of Wildlife Resources Aquatic Section. A bonus limit is designed to encourage people to harvest a particular species. And we don't want necessarily to have, say, an 8 fish limit for all trout when we're trying to target the removal of brook trout. And we are actually encouraging people to, over and above their, say, 4 fish limit, take an additional 4 brook trout home, but they can only do that after they've achieved their initial limit, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Any other questions from the RAC?
No questions, but it is exciting to see that there will be more fishing opportunities within southeastern Utah. It's depressing to see that the Green River Pond won't be a fishery anymore, but to see the rivers really open up to a new sport fish, I think is going to be excellent. And I'm excited to see some outreach for that in Moab to see how we can start targeting those species.
Are you hearing the questions okay, Craig?
I am, and I can kind of expand on that a little bit. I know just prior to the meeting, I went through and reviewed the presentation that you all had an opportunity to see. And it was very interesting that I kind of saw some common themes throughout that presentation, that our regulation changes are designed to achieve some common outcomes. Expansion of angling opportunities and dispersal of angling pressure is definitely one of those. Establishment of predator-prey balance is another one that I'm excited to see that we're pursuing. Establishment of self-sustaining populations to alleviate some of the pressure on our hatcheries is another one I'm excited to see. And then really encouraging angler use of fish that would otherwise be lost to some of the poor habitat conditions that we are seeing as we face challenges related to water quantity and quality issues.
Thank you. Go ahead, Rac.
With the, are there currently the roundtail chubs in these rivers that are that were indicated in the presentation, or is that something that will be introduced?
So the locations that were specified for the 2023 rollout are all existing populations. We worked with all of our regional native aquatics biologists statewide to identify populations that they felt could afford angling pressure. And we tailored the 3 different regulations that were specified in the presentation and are proposed for 2023 to basically what those populations could withstand. In addition to the ones that you all are seeing for 2023, you all hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, good. The yellow dot popped up and indicated that my internet connection was bad, so I'm gonna make sure. In addition to the ones that we've proposed for 2023, we also have some that are potential populations that we're going to expand roundtail population distribution in the state that would be offered up as potential angling opportunities in the near future, probably 2024, 2025.
I just have one quick question, Craig. With the closing the ponds here in Green River, I understand the fish that were stocked there had pretty low survival. What types of fish were tried there? Was it cold water fish, or was it something that was more warm water, or was it just the condition of the water, the dirt, or what was in it?
It's warm water species that we struggled with. Oddly enough, the Green River Pond is not alone. It's experienced that over multiple years, but this year we are experiencing something similar on our community waters along the Wasatch Front, with temperatures hovering around 107 degrees today. Our catfish were actually supposed to be delivered today for stocking into those ponds, and we've had to postpone that. It's probably the canary in the coal mine, I would imagine, even with the use of warm water fish. Some of these smaller impoundments, it's just going to be more difficult to keep fish alive, especially immediately post-stocking during peak seasons like summertime.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Do we have any more questions from the RAC? Any questions from the audience here? And we don't have any online comments? Okay, we'll have Chris Wood go through the online comments.
We just had one person respond to our online poll. They strongly agreed with the division's recommendations, including supporting the changes to Rule 657-13 and 657-14.
And we have no comment cards from the audience for this? Okay. Comments, discussion from the RAC?
I'll make a motion to accept the division's recommendations as proposed. Okay.
That was quick. We have a motion to approve the division's recommendations as presented and a second. Do we have any discussion on the motion? All in favor? It looks unanimous. That was quick.
Thanks all for the support. Appreciate it.
Kirk is on and he voted in the affirmative. I do not see Lynn online any longer.
Yeah, I'm on. Yes.
Oh, there he is.
Yes.
All right, it is still unanimous. Lynn voted yes. Okay. Next, we have up the item 6, the Henry Mountains Bison Management Plan. There's quite a bit to go through, and we have Guy Wallace here ready to answer any questions that the RAC might have.
You guys have a question?
I actually have a question. In the discussion on that, in your presentation and in the literature we read, you talked about a genetically pure strain on the Henry Mountains, and that was used to stock the Book Cliffs initially from the division side. And then there was a question in one of the other RACs about, if we have to bring in other animals to augment that herd because of the drought, we're knocking it back because of drought if we want to augment it in the future. There was no question asked. I didn't see where those animals might come from. And if they're brought back from the Book Cliffs, which is a thriving herd right now, do we know that the Book Cliffs herd is genetically pure still, given the interbreeding with the tribal herd?
There was a study that was done by the Department of Interior on 16 of the bison herds that are on Department of Interior lands. And they looked at the genetics of all those populations, and they had some varying level of cattle integration into the bison herds. And the Book Cliffs, I don't remember where they were, but there was a level of cattle integration into that herd. Where we would look was probably be a Yellowstone herd that we could bring back in, and we've been putting feelers out and we had a couple possibilities. We had a year or so ago, we were looking at probably trying to bring in some from Montana, but the sportsmen of that state decided they wanted to keep their bison within state and augment their own populations rather than let them go out of state. So we weren't able to get those. And we're looking into some other possible sources for that. But this study also indicated that the Henry Mountains did have a lower level of genetic diversity. And so we've been wanting to do that even before we reduce the numbers on the Henrys. We've been wanting to introduce or get some new blood into that herd.
Go ahead, Eric.
I got a couple of questions, Guy. You indicated that your data, you've done some studies, and that 325 number is pretty critical to maintain a healthy herd. You also indicated that currently, because of the drought situation, we've been managing under that, but I didn't hear what that number was. Can you tell, what's the number for the last year, or how many years has it been below that 325?
Sure. 2 years ago, we recommended enough permits that we reduced the herd down to 290 adults postseason. And we remained at that last year. So we've been at 290 for the last 2 years. This year, we were down there a month or so ago, kind of in the middle of these series of storms that were coming through. And we observed some areas that looked pretty good. But there was also some areas that still looked really poor. And some of them may have received additional storms since then. But we felt at the time that it would be best to try and reduce that herd a little bit more, just because of some of those areas that really look tough. And, and hopefully when they improve, if they improve and we do get some moisture and it looks better next year, we can kind of try and work our way back to the objective to 325.
So if I understood it right, didn't the board do an emergency adjustment to that number and knock that number down?
Yes.
And what's that number?
The number that'll go to after the recommended permits for these hunts, it'll be 275.
275.
That's the number we'll be at, yeah, or right around 275.
Okay. So do you have any data that shows, if we manage below that 325 level that the information says you need, how long can you sustain those lower numbers without it having a big effect on the herd?
That's a good question because there's not a good answer for that. There's varying studies that have suggested different numbers of minimum viable populations that we need to have to reduce the potential for inbreeding. And, one that we had looked at and studied quite a bit suggested 430 plus animals total was what was necessary. But since then, there's been others that have been upwards of 1,000 or more animals, which is not practical for the Henry Mountains. But it's basically theory that's based on probability of extinction over a period of time, so that if you reduce that herd to a low number and continue that for a long period of time, that you increase the probability of inbreeding and possible loss of those animals. So, we want to try and be careful about that. We want to make sure we don't maintain it so low that it does increase that potential. But we think there's some flexibility there that for a period of time, we can bring them down a little bit and hopefully conditions turn around.
And is that 325 number based on the 50 bulls per 100 cows ratio, or is that based on a different ratio?
No, the ratio is kind of a separate item. It's a separate objective that we manage for. We could manage whatever that ratio we decided or what we'd want and still have 325 adults. The bull-cow ratio was based on trying to maintain a quality hunt, to have, a large number of mature, older age class bulls in the herd.
Yeah, and I understood that, but I guess my question is, in doing that, in managing for those quality, does that affect that herd viability at those numbers?
Yeah, yes and no. Trying to maintain that number to keep those older age class animals in the population is a good thing, to maintain genetic diversity in those older animals. So from that standpoint, it's a good thing. But the problem is that most of our hunters want to kill or harvest older animals. And so that kind of works against that theory for trying to maintain that genetic diversity in the herd. So, and the studies basically said that, that the longer those animals are around, so we have the older animals in the herd, that's how we keep the genetic variability higher, by having those older age animals in that herd. And it would be really difficult to have some kind of a yearling harvest, that's basically what you'd have to do to try and do that. But that's part of it. It's part of it.
Any other questions from the RAC? Questions from the audience? Do we have any comment cards? No comment cards. We have no online comments, but we do have.
That's number 5. No, number 6.
I did just have a comment, which is that I know it's a very complicated issue, and I feel like the the Bison Committee has spent a lot of time and energy and come up with a really great kind of compromise, and I commend you on that because I know it's tough. So thanks.
Yeah, thank you. It was tough, and I at each of these meetings I tried not to do the same old spiel, but I tried to think of a new word, a new adjective for how this committee process went, and the one I came up with for tonight was challenging. It was very challenging. It was probably you know, I've had a lot of challenges in my career, but a lot of them have been, you know, how do we get this deer herd back, and how do we catch these animals, and how do we take care of these problem bears, things like that, where you can go out in the field and do some work. But this one was a tough challenge because it had such a diverse group of people and very passionate about their interest in this herd. It's, you know, recognized nationally. So there's a lot of eyes on this herd watching what we do. And so it was hard to get through this. And I would want to say that the committee was very devoted to getting this done. Even though we took a 6-month break because of COVID, we had very few meetings that we had people absent. Most of the meetings had everybody there, and maybe one missing, but they were there. They spent the time, and we had some really hard discussions that were difficult to get through. And I think everybody was willing to work through it. They were there in the, you know, spirit of cooperation, and if we'd have had people on that committee that dug their heels in, I think we'd have still been at it. So I think we had people there that were willing to try and work through this and come up with a plan that maybe wasn't perfect for everyone, but it was something that we could live with and try and use to manage the herd and resolve the issues that they had. And there were some big issues.
Comments from the audience, Troy Justensen.
Oh, geez, nice.
You get the podium today.
I get the podium. Nice. Troy Justensen, Sportsman, Fish and Wildlife. Eric, you need to be real careful not to confuse the carbonemery limit with the bonus limit. All right, buddy? No, I'm representing kind of 3 hats tonight. I sat on this Bison committee. I also represent SFW. But what's my third hat? Hell, 54 years old and forgetting things. But very appreciative of the opportunity to sit on there. Oh, I know it. A permittee. We are permittees on that mountain. As Guy pointed out, we are pretty dedicated, this committee was, to going through and talking, have some hardcore discussions on some of the issues that we faced. And the end product, is it perfect? No. Did I get everything that I wanted? No. Did I get everything they wanted? No. So at the end of the day, I feel real comfortable with what we came up with. This is a prize jewel. That's probably one of the biggest things I learned through this whole process is I learned more about the history to this herd and what they represent. This is worth protecting. But on the flip side, which came to my, and just as important to me as well, is protecting the livelihoods that have been on that mountain for decades, generations. And so I think we worked hard to reach a compromise, to come together. I'm very appreciative of Troy Forrest with Ag and a lot of other people that stepped up and had some hard conversations. So we support this. Thank you.
Hey, Troy, while you're there, Chris didn't tell me about your card for the last item on the fishing. Do you have any comments?
No, I just appreciate what the division does with fish, and we support the recommendations. Today, I drove past Otter Creek in what used to be Cusharam Reservoir. And it's tough to see that with, the current drought conditions, a lot of our reservoirs are gone, but appreciate the hard work that goes in from the division to maintain a great fishery in the state. So thank you.
Thanks, Troy. Troy Forrest.
Troy Forrest with the Utah Department of Agriculture and Food. I also served on the committee and want to express to you my appreciation to that committee and to the division for bringing a diverse group of people together and bringing a facilitator in that helped us get through the hard conversations. And we had them. And I think in the end, we truly came up with a compromise that we're proud of and want to support. We took the time to have the hard conversations, to talk about the things that you don't want to talk about because we're at loggerheads with it. And we came to a not perfect plan, as Troy said, but a plan that we can all live with and gives us all a path forward to meet those goals that we're all part of the committee's goals, which is to have that bison herd and to have a viable agriculture operation that operates on those same public lands. We don't think that either one's mutually exclusive. We think both of them can happen. And moving forward, we've got to keep that spirit of cooperation in, because if we just target each other and try to smash each other in the mouth and win for our side, everybody's going to lose in the end. So we endorse the plan, we support it, and hope that you'll support it as well. Thanks.
Kevin Albrecht.
Normally, as a wildlife board member, I would not come and during a vote on a plan and have discussion, but I felt it important to talk about this committee that was put together. There was a lot of hard discussion, and I can tell you that the two gentlemen that just spoke, they lost some hide when they went back to their constituents because they wanted more on both sides. And they're being modest when they tell you that they didn't get all that their groups wanted. But there's some hard discussions going on with the Henrys, with the drought and the habitat conditions, and it's just not in a place that can give either side. And so me coming today is not to sway your vote one way or the other, but is talk to the committee that worked over 2.5 years to come where they come. As a wildlife board, we usually have one person on every committee to sit, to learn how that goes and take that back to the board and be able to be more understanding of the process. And my eyes were really opened through this process. I have a great appreciation for the committee, all that they worked for. I know that the ag group, they went back and they got their butts chewed from some of their own people, but they had those hard discussions across the table and they knew where they had to be. And the same goes for the sportsmen. After having all those discussions, you have a different perspective. And I am so grateful that I had the opportunity to hear those discussions. And like Troy Justice has said, to learn the value of this Henry Mountain herd. It's absolutely a gem that we have here in the state. So I'm very appreciative of all the work that this committee put in. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. I was really appreciative of being able to read the report and stuff and the plan that the committee put out. It was informative. I learned a lot of things I did not know about that Henry Mountains herd. And I appreciate the committee and their hard work and the division's work in setting that up and putting that together and helping us to go forward. We definitely want to keep that herd and keep the cattle grazing and everything on that mountain. And I appreciate the work these people put in doing that. With that, do we have no more public comments? Okay, we'll open that up to RAC discussion now.
I've talked to a couple of individuals about the committee and the things that were discussed, and I think Troy said it really well. It's nobody really got what they want. I mean, the cattlemen didn't get what they wanted. The sportsmen didn't get what they wanted. But it's a good compromise somewhere in the middle. Is it perfect? Probably not. But I think the numbers that are there, and that's why I asked the questions earlier about the numbers being below that objective, concern with what that might do and the potential of losing this, as it was called, a gem, because it really is something that's very valuable to everybody in the state. So I think it's a great compromise. I'll support the division's proposal, so.
Any other discussion?
I'll make a motion to support the proposal as presented by the division.
Okay,
I'll second that.
we have a motion and a second to approve the division's proposal as recommended. Any discussion on the motions? All in favor?
Aye.
It is unanimous. And, you know, I appreciate what Kevin just said about that a minute ago. To really appreciate what goes on, you need to, if you can't be on a committee, maybe some of these committees for various things, go and watch their meetings and learn about what goes on. It's informative to sit on these committees. It really is. You get to see everyone's perspective and you get to hear things from perspectives you might not have thought about in the past, and you understand everybody has their own perspective and they see things different ways, and it's neither right nor wrong, but we have to come together and we have to work together and find common ground. And I think that's a good thing, and maybe we'd have less controversy if we did that more often, looked at someone else's perspective. So if you get a chance, go to some of these committee meetings and just sit in and watch. It is informative. Our final agenda item, number 7, landowner rule amendments. And Chad Wilson is here to field questions. So any questions from the RAC?
Can I just make one clarification?
Yeah, please.
It was just brought to my attention that one person at least understood in my presentation when I talked about Diamond Mountain's letter, that their request was to take all the animals off of Diamond Mountain. It was to take it off of Diamond Mountain land, not off the entire unit. I told that individual I'd make sure that that was clear going forward.
Chad, when the committee met with the LOA to discuss these 6 proposals, how'd that process work? Was it, I'm just curious if it was smooth or if it was a rough one?
So, and maybe I'll start because they put this slide up here just as this will be a good background to get into that. So this June 2nd, the Wildlife Board passed the rule that we're currently working with. They passed it with a caveat that the Landowner Association members could unite and come back to our landowner permit committee and make recommendations to that committee. Any of those recommendations that were agreed upon by the committee and the DWR would go back through the RAC and board process to be heard. Anything that was not agreed upon would not be presented to the RACs and the board. So with that, the landowner associations did come on July 28th. They met with our committee. The 4 proposals that are listed in there were accepted. Probably what we spent the most amount of time on was the multiplier. And there was a lot of talk on that. I think when it came down to it, there wasn't a comfort with the 1.5 multiplier. There was some concession that potentially there would be some spot for a multiplier in the future. There was a lot more comfort with a multiplier being on option 2, which is the option where they stay on private lands. The thought was the public land is the multiplier. Being able to hunt that whole entire unit greatly appreciates that tag. So they can sell that for a lot more than they could if it was on their private land. These tags, as a reminder, come from the public draw. So they are precious, I would say. You know, these are tags that take well over 10 years, if not 15 or 20 to draw. So yeah, they're precious tags to us. We LOAs get them every year. So we feel like it's a substantial give.
Just as a clarification, I'm pretty sure I understand it right, but essentially, if that multiplier was passed, those extra tags that would go to the LOA basically come right out of the public permit numbers, correct?
Yes, every tag that goes to the LOA comes out of the public draw.
Yeah, that's okay, thanks.
Any other questions from the RAC? Kirk and Lynn, right now, we're not able to see you if you hit the raise your hand, so just speak up if you have questions. No other questions from the RAC. Do we have questions from the audience? No questions from the audience. Do we have online comments, Chris? No online comments. We have one comment from the audience here, Bob Ott.
Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to provide comments from the Utah Limited Landowner Association. The items that were presented were pretty much agreed upon with the exception of one issue, which is the multiplier that was requested by the Landowners Association members. We've been working with all the associations in the state. We're working towards getting organized and having a statewide organization so that we can be better prepared to address issues throughout the state on landowner associations. The overall main issues that the landowners had were hunter access and the recommendation of a 1-to-1 ratio for landowner land compared to the public land. I think we've pretty well worked out the hunter access issue on most of the LOAs. I will say that there are still some issues, and of course, access issue for Diamond Mountain is still a rather large issue. But let me discuss the rationale behind the 1.5 multiplier that we requested. And that is that we enlisted the help of a wildlife biologist, and he indicated that his experience throughout the state on privately held, especially agriculture lands, was that the wildlife densities were 2 to 3 times the density as there was on public lands. And we felt that a 1.5 multiplier would be somewhat of a compromise compared to just going for a 2 or a 3, as he had indicated was typical throughout the state. Some of the basis for that is that, and I'm going to give you an example of the Paunsaugunt Landowners Association, for which I'm the president, is that we have 61% of our members have irrigated alfalfa fields distributed throughout the unit. And we've all spent enough time on the ground to know that an irrigated alfalfa field is pretty much a magnet for wildlife, elk, deer, and antelope. And so there's a significant use there. They use during the day, they use during the night, and then they may go back onto public land to digest their meal. But there's a lot of use on that type of property. And to just say, well, all acres are 1-to-1, that doesn't seem very equitable to the LOA members. Perhaps it gets down more to someone deciding what the compensation should be for landowners and saying, well, let's come up with a formula that gives us that value. But we still disagree with the 1-to-1 for the reasons I just stated. And so we would recommend, as we have to all of the RACs that we have attended, that we be granted at least a 1.5 multiplier for our lands. And this will not increase substantially the number of permits we get, but at least it gives all the landowners the optics that someone's trying to be equitable and fair with the value of the properties that they have for wildlife. The whole purpose for this program is to help landowners tolerate wildlife depredation, to help them also be willing to develop their lands for the benefit of wildlife habitat, and to promote that for the benefit of the wildlife and all of us who enjoy the benefits of the wildlife we have in the state, whether it be hunters, cameramen, just sightseers, people who love wildlife. That's really what it's all about. And so we would just encourage you to take that into consideration, and thank you for the opportunity to make comments.
Thank you. Troy Justice.
Troy Justinson, Sportsman, Fish and Wildlife. We support the division's recommendations with the 4 added issues that came back from the committee. Speaking to the multiplier, my organization does not support a 1.5 across the board. I do believe Bob has a point when it comes to irrigated alfalfa. And then if we could figure out something that's fair, because we all know that alfalfa is cocaine to deer and they like it to be there. And so something along those lines to, look at those irrigated crops with a little higher rating than that of rangeland, we could get behind that. Thank you.
Thank you. No other public comments? I'll open it up to RAC discussion.
I have a question for Mr. Orr. Seeing that the LOA is against the 1-to-1 ratio for access, doesn't that seem kind of counterintuitive to ask for more tags? Because that's that many more public hunters that you'll have to grant access to.
Let me make sure I understand your question. Could you please repeat that?
So the LOA, as I understand it, is against the 1-to-1 ratio for access to public hunters. But if you're granted 1.5 more tags, that multiplier, that's that many more public hunters that the LOA would have to allow on their land. Kind of seems counterintuitive. What's the reason behind that?
I don't think that, for example, in the LOA that I'm the president of, I don't think that's an issue. We have always allowed public hunters, and we've tried to accommodate public hunters on a first come, first served basis. If we were to ask for more tags, then certainly that is an issue that goes right along with it. We would expect that we would have more hunters. It's something that's very difficult to deal with when you have a popular unit like our unit, And people will have so many bonus points that they think they're going to grow so old they'll never hunt before they ever get there. And yet there's a limited resource. Our intent is not to hog the resource. Our intent is to try to have a formula that's equitable for the landowners that does what I mentioned the process is trying to do. Agriculture is, I don't know if you've noticed it around the state, but it's going away. There's development knocking at our door. Water rights are valuable for our ranches and farms, and communities and developers want the water rights. You see alfalfa fields go fallow and dry and just go away. And then you see homes and businesses and all sorts of things take over the land. So our habitat for wildlife is diminishing, and it can't be all one direction that the landowner's rights are totally neglected for the expense of the rest of society, or pretty quick we won't have any agricultural lands and habitat, and we won't have the benefits of the wildlife. So it's a catch-22. I hope we can slow that down. Some people call it progress, but sometimes I almost feel like we're going backwards in some of this stuff. But I don't think that for us, the additional hunters would be an issue. And I'm hoping that we can work that out with all the landowner associations so that we don't have people pull out and just throw their hands in the air and abandon the stuff. I'm not a real fan of, well, let's just give 72-hour notices and start right now. You know, I don't think that benefits all of us at all. That answer your question? Thank you.
Can I make a comment? I guess I watched a really great PhD thesis defense from Cole, I think I don't know how to pronounce his last name, Blakey, like Bleke, who was one of Eric Giesey's students, who talked about, it was looking at fecal nitrogen across pronghorn and how many babies they had and body condition of the yearlings. And the conclusion that he came up with was that actually the fecal nitrogen from alfalfa was a lot lower than expected. So a lot of that fecal nitrogen was coming from forbs in the environment and actually not from these alfalfa fields. And I think that dissertation was just published in August, so it's a good thing to look up, but it kind of might be a little counter to what has been presented by previous wildlife biologists.
I watched the board meeting on this LOA rule amendments, and I was a little disappointed to see the decision made by the board. At least in this RAC, we had voted unanimously to pass the amendments as we had them, and to see them come back and make all these people that have done this hard work, these committees that have gotten together, the LOAs had their representation there, to make them come back and then add in things after the fact, I felt was a disservice to the people that put the time in to do that.
Chad, do we have any data that, like, say from collared animals, that I've done a little bit of research into this, and you know, some of the collar data, I guess, doesn't necessarily reflect the usage that was indicated. Do we have anything to back that up, or is it, you know, what?
Yeah, we're in the process of trying to gather some, but the one that we actually do have that data on is the Ponsegont. And let's see if I can bring up my computer here so I don't say it wrong. I don't know if it's that one. Anyway, from what we could see from our caller data, the LOA had, I believe, about 4.8% of the habitat in that species. And from caller data usage, the usage was around 5.5. I can't remember if it was 5.4 or 5.6. Let's see. Oh, here it is. I found it. So if you look at year-round usage, they have 4.8% of the habitat and 5.45% of usage on LOA lands. That was with with the ponds gone. So the other ones, what we did is we didn't have all the shape files and stuff for all the LOAs. We had it for the Ponsagon. That's why we were able to run it on that one. But when we just ran it for how much deer were on private land, on public land, it was 58% of the collar was on public land. So that would be 42% on private lands. When you subtracted the CWMU and the non-LOA lands is when it dropped down to that number. So you see a lot of usage on private land, but CWMUs, which is some of the data that they use to come up with their multiplier, and when they're stating these numbers, they're using numbers off of CWMUs to get that. CWMUs and LOAs are a lot different. CWMUs are at least 5,000 acres contiguous. A lot of them are 10,000 for elk. They've got to be 10,000 acres contiguous land. So you're looking at big, huge chunks of private land that would make it a lot easier to have more animals on them. Also, some of the CWMUs are on just general season units. If they're on a general season unit, you would expect there to be a lot more. So yeah, there's more usage on the private lands. CWMUs are probably going to have higher than non-CWMU lands as well. That's one of the reasons, like we're committed to have discussions going forward, but we're not comfortable with this data because of that, because there's just too many factors to look at right now.
Go ahead, Dax.
Mr. Chairman, if you might indulge me too, I'm Dax Mangus. I'm the big game program coordinator. And I was just going to kind of reiterate what Chad said. We have pretty good data on the Ponsagon that shows pretty close to 1-to-1. A lot of our deer collar studies were initially designed to track deer survival and not necessarily designed to track, they might not be conducted at the right spatial scale to really make inferences about habitat use at a unit-wide level. We have great survival data. We're still working through it. I think we have pretty good data on some units, but maybe not really good data on all the units. So just something to keep in mind. And this proportional use idea, it's pretty clean. It makes the program, the ability to administer the program pretty clean. Looking at, proportional acreage, but it's also not perfect in the use and the season of the use and when that use occurs. There's a lot of questions here. We could spend a ton of time, arguing about, what use matters and when it matters, and if animals are on certain property during the day or during the night and things like that. So just something to keep in mind. It's great to look at these data and take them into consideration, and also the data are not perfect. So.
That actually answers the question I was going to ask. Thank you.
Thanks both of you for that clarification. I have, just comments, and I, for one, I think there's, like you said, there's so many variables, and when you look at all the LOAs, I don't know what the acreage is that's cultivated fields, but I think that the vast majority of a lot of these LOAs is rangeland. And so for that reason, I would have a lot of heartburn with that multiplier across the board. Maybe for those rangelands, there needs to be something a little different, or sorry, for the cultivated lands. Maybe that's something that needs to be looked at in the future, but I just don't think that multiplier across the board does justice to all of the different types of circumstances throughout the LOAs.
Has anybody looked at it? You guys off the committee, any of you, Chad, have you looked at the percentage of the properties in the LOAs that are rangeland versus cultivated cropland?
No, we don't have that broken down. I'd say most are generally rangeland. We do have some that do have a decent amount of ag land. We did discuss, it did come up in committee from one of the committee members of, should we entertain this? And it was discussed. We spent a lot of time on this, and that was kind of one of those too, that it's like, maybe there's some rooms there for it, but it wasn't going to be resolved in that evening. We spent probably a couple hours talking about things, but we did leave that committee meeting saying that this is something that could be discussed in the future. And it is like Dak said, I don't know that we have the right data right now for us to make any of those recommendations. We're comfortable with the recommendation that we made. If you look, there's a lot of limited entry units throughout the state. Not all of them have LOAs on them. So we feel that there is incentive. I think the ones that don't have LOAs, matter of fact, I know because some of them say, can you get rid of the 50% rule so we can be a LOA? The ones that are not involved in this would love to participate in it as it's stated. So, and I can understand frustrations on LOAs because they did have something and they feel a loss. Some of that loss is that in years where we cut public tags, the LOA's permits stayed higher or the same as what they were. So there's kind of two ways to look at that. Sometimes of did they take loss or did they stay up artificially high and now it's coming back to where it would have been. Did that answer it? I felt like I kind of went in a circle.
I think it does. Is it a fair assessment then that moving forward, that this isn't the hard and fast end of everything, that there will be, between the division and the LOAs, we'll be talking more about maybe some kind of extra for irrigated cropland in places where people growing especially alfalfa and corn?
Yeah, as a division,
Big game are really attracted to those two crops.
Yeah. As a division, we are committed to that, to going forward and continuing with discussions. I think one of the good things that came out of this, that even the LOAs would agree upon, well, it was part of their recommendation too, but we're very supportive, is that LOA Advisory Committee. It's a place that we can have discussions. There's a president's training that makes it so that we have more discussion with them as well. So I think that the communication going forward will be a lot better. And we're committed to, rules open every 5 years. I think now's the time to go with what we have. We put a lot of work into it and we're comfortable with where it stands right now. But that doesn't mean that we can't refine things going forward.
I think that's a good comment. I think we need a starting point, and this is probably a good starting point. And we've got a committee now. You can have discussions and refine things as we go forward.
So some of you guys have been around long enough. You remember Bill Bates? He was kind of famous for always coming up and chiming in when someone else was trying to give a presentation. So I'm being the Bill Bates tonight. I just wanted to mention, there are several of the current LOAs that within their bylaws, they write a permit distribution plan within their bylaws. Several of the LOAs give additional weight to irrigated acreages. So the ability to do that exists now. A lot of you are perhaps familiar with the Book Cliffs LOA. They weighted irrigated cultivated land 33-1 versus rangeland acres in their bylaws when they determined how they were going to distribute the permits internally within their association. So that ability to differentiate those lands does exist now, there's not additional permits given because of that, but that ability exists now within, the current structure of the LOA program. It has existed in the past.
Thanks, Dax. Any other discussion?
I guess I was just going to say, I like all the extra discussion and clarification of, the commitment on moving forward. So I guess I feel really comfortable supporting the division's recommendations, and I liked your comment. It's a good place to start. So.
Any other comments, discussion from the RAC? Motions?
I'll make the motion then. I'd like to make a motion to accept the LOA rule amendments as proposed.
And I'll second it. This is Kirk.
Now we have a motion to accept the LOA rule amendments as presented and was seconded. Any discussion on the motion?
That motion's just on the 4 that was agreed upon by the DWR. Is it all 6?
Yeah, just the 4 DWR.
Any other discussion on the motion? All in favor?
Yes.
And it is unanimous. Okay, and that is the
Can I
end.
say something?
Well, yeah, Chris would like to talk to you.
On my regional update, I don't know if you can pull that up again, Phil, but somehow I skipped over the wildlife slide of my update. So I just thought maybe I'd give a quick wildlife update of what that section is doing, because they are working hard. And Guy has been mad the entire meeting, so let's make Guy happy. There we go. Okay, so the wildlife section has been very busy too the last few months. I can't see what I'm reading now. That's all right. No, I should have it memorized, huh? Disappointing. Okay, they've been classifying elk, bison, and mountain goats. They've been doing rabbit surveys, and the rabbit trends are slightly up. We've also been working on statewide committee plans. The statewide elk plan, which Kent has been a part of, and Trish Hadeen has been a part of, is wrapping up, and they're going to be taking that plan out in the upcoming year, I think, to the RAC and board. And then we're just getting started on the bear plan and the turkey plan. There's also a technology committee as well. So I'm the facilitator for the bear plan. There's a lot of great Southeastern region representation. Kirk is on that committee from our RAC, as is several other San Juan and Emery County folks. So is Dr. Bursey. So sorry for that. And then lastly, we are doing CWD check stations this year. We're focusing on the LaSalle and the San Juan units. So we'll be having check stations. We'll be getting those samples at meat lockers. And so we hope for high sample numbers in those units. So if you have any questions, Guy is here to answer them.
We'll open that up to any questions from the RAC on that. If not, we're adjourned.